Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector and going over kind of my thoughts on the different units for the different factions here for multiplayer matchups, just to help give new players some ideas on what my thoughts are after playing, probably close to 70 multiplayer matches, if not a little bit more. So the Orks are the newest faction here. Definitely a very interesting faction. They're kind of like the Tyranids in that you have to decide how you want to select your forces, because you'll get a bunch of buffs depending on how you end up building your guys out. So their main command unit is the War Boss here at 220. He's got a Power Claw, so he's got 4 splash damage, does a bunch of damage for the base damage. So one of the most powerful melee units in the game, as you would certainly hope for a single entity. The thing that's also interesting is he's actually got a hell of a accuracy and good shooting with his shooter here. It has an armor piercing of 3, so it can damage most units. He also has this combi rocket, which gives you some good splash damage at armor piercing of 3. It's got 2 ammunition with a reload time. It's a free attack. Nothing special, but you could end up using it to weaken forces and then use your combi or your Power Claw to kill the rest of the units. If you're doing a heavy melee build, you definitely want to bring the War Boss out, because he gives 10% melee accuracy and 10% or 15% melee damage bonus. So keep that into consideration. And then he also has a 2-turn free attack with his attack squig here that inflicts 35 damage at armor piercing of 3. The next unit here for their commander is the Weird Boy. He's an excellent unit. Kind of sucks in melee, does have a little bit of splash damage, so can kind of defend himself, but nothing special, nor would you really expect your Weird Boy to be an amazing melee unit, despite having, arms bigger than some of the other units' whole waist here. But his issues is he's got some major bonuses here for his units. First one is Jabbin' Fingers. It gives 40% accuracy minus 10% evasion, so can definitely, and it has a range of 5, which is excellent. So it allows you to really affect and mess up the accuracy of other units here to really help yourself. He also has the ability to use the Warpath. So all allies, whether mechanized or organic, end up getting plus 15% damage and minus 10% damage received. It lasts for 2 turns, takes 3 turns to cool down. And then he also has the Headbanger. I think it only has a range of 3 or 4, I always forget. So it's sometimes a little hard to get close enough to use this effectively, but it does 60 to 80 damage with an armor piercing of 7, so allows him to do some anti-vehicle damage as well. The next commander unit is the Big Mech. He's got the custom Mega Blasta. It's got a good accuracy with a base of 90. It has 2 splash damage. It has an armor piercing of 6, so it's good against vehicles. Pretty regularly does 30 to 60 damage, and same with against infantry. He does have a melee attack, nothing special, but if he does get stuck in melee range and can't get out of it, he can defend himself. Does 56 to 70 with a splash of 2. He's got several useful abilities, however. The first is a repair ability for vehicles, restores 30 HP, and then gives +1 armor for 2 turns. He also has the custom force field, which is just always active. What that does is reduce the damage received by the Big Mech by 20%, and then anybody within 2 tiles of him gets minus 10%. I don't believe that stacks with other Big Mechs that are in the area. It's just 1 is my understanding. And then he also has an armor booster, which allows him to improve the ranged armor and evasion of a non-vehicle unit, and that lasts for 2 turns as well. The next unit is the Pain Boy, I should say. They finally buffed him. I was actually sometimes put in little multiplayer comments with a whole list of things that I'd recommend changing, some of which happen, most of which don't. It's always very controversial when I do that. I think people typically think I want all the changes to happen. I just want to throw out some ideas. But one of the ones I was going to have for him is either give him, when he does damage to units, instead of heal him, give him a buff, or give some sort of other buff, or give him a second action point. Because what happens is he is a healer, but it's only an 85% chance to heal, and it definitely feels like it's less than 85% chance to heal, and if he fails, he ends up doing 11 to 15 damage to a single model, which usually ends up killing that model. If it's a failed heal. He does have a power claw to do some melee damage to be able to protect himself. But now he's got a new ability here. I think he's supposed to have a little Gretchen assistant, but I don't see it here. But since he has that, it has now he applies a 15% bonus HP to all adjacent allied units within 2 tiles of the Pain Boy. I assume that's only organic units. I haven't played around enough with it. I can't imagine it's also going to affect vehicles, because that seems like it'd be a little overpowered. But it definitely is now makes these Pain Boys worthwhile to bring, because before it was kind of a hard sell for 100 points to have a unit with only 1 action point that only is 85% effective to be able to do something for you. The next unit is the Orks Stormboys. I have very mixed feelings about these guys. They don't have a ton of armor, but they just got a HP boost, so maybe that's going to make them be more survivable. But they don't do great amount of damage. They do have 2 attacks here. If you get some flanks, they can stick down some land speeders and things, which are good. Their ranged attacks are absolutely abysmal. They do have the ability to use some mob rule though, so they get momentum gains. They have the rocket pack ability, which is just like every other rocket pack, gives them some accuracy debuffs to range, but increases their movement. The thing that's a little unique to these guys is there's only 1 jump infantry. Is not only do they have the jump charge attack, but then if there's weaker units that are nearby, you can end up using the Stormboy Strike. And again, this is an ability that it doesn't matter how many units are left in the squad, it always does the same amount of damage. So it's effectively turning them into a grenade, where you just run in there. They can jump over territory. It gives splash damage to 33 to 45 against all models, and does quite a bit of damage, especially if they're weak. So you can use it to finish off units, especially if they've the squad here has been reduced, or you can just use it to jump around the battlefield to do a bunch of damage to units while you're trying to capture strategic points. The next unit is the Gretchen. A lot of players will end up using these guys because they're so cheap, and they do a surprising amount of damage. For what you would see here, you'd think, oh, these guys are going to suck, but if you get them especially to flank units, they can pretty persistently dish out some decent damage even against vehicles like land speeders if they get flanked, or heroes. And because there's, you know, what, 10 models in this group here, it can sometimes be a pain in the ass to take them out, so they're good at holding strategic points and other locations, or to just soak up fire and overwatch shots, as long as you're not shooting or getting shot at by units that have lots of different shots, to just be able to focus on all these different units here. The boys, these guys are incredibly good. Most players will end up maxing out the amount of boys you have. If you're worried about playing jump infantry, I'd recommend that you end up going with some regular shooters just for the front line here, because what happens is most players are instead going to want to use the big shooters, which have 12 attack. And they have a base damage 3 to 5 with 2 armor piercing, range of 4. You're like, oh, that doesn't seem like it's very good. But they have this amazing ability down here called Get Stuck In. So effectively it adds 2 damage to the attacks you would make in exchange for making them suffer more melee damage. So this effectively allows them to do damage to vehicles. I have yet to see any players on multiplayer, including myself, use the rocket launcher ability here. Effectively it's got some splash damage, so they might be able to do a lot of damage to some weaker units, but in terms of an armor piercing of 3, it just doesn't seem like it's a good trade-off. And they only have 2 ammunition, and it has a reload time of 2 turns, so you're only going to be able to attack every 2 turns, so just doesn't seem like a good trade-off. Whereas if you use these guys in the front line, they get attacked, they can soak up some shots, and then you can counter-attack with using the Get Stuck In to be able to shoot at a range of 1, since they'll still have an accuracy of 65. And they also have one of the more powerful grenades here, the stick bombs, at 26 to 35 with an armor piercing at 2. So it seems like these grenades can one-shot the low-tier Tyranid units like Hormagaunts almost take out entire swarms of gargoyles, so definitely a powerful ability to use while you're waiting for your get stuck in ability to come back up, or if you're too close. The knobs are quite disappointing, to be quite frank. I can say I've only seen 1 or 2 players on multiplayer match try to use the knobs, and they've always just really regretted it. For 110 points, they're just not worth it. They're too expensive. Their default hammers here barely do any damage. They only have 3 armor, so yes, they have a lot of HP, but they're going to be killed before you get into range combat. They do have the Hit a Martyr ability, so it increases their accuracy, increases their damage, and they slightly get an increased damage receive. If you really want to start turning them into something better, you really got to spend the points to get them these better attacks here. But then by this point in time, you're now up to 130 points, and it's just not worth it, because for 155 points you can get Mega Armor Knobs, and they have the kill saws that have splash damage, so they can, if you use that in addition to their version of Hit 'em Armor, this can effectively take out a full squad of Assault Marines and do a lot of good damage for you. And they also have custom shooters, which are fairly decent at taking out low tier infantry, or if you want to be more fancy, you can give them the Combi Scorches, which now will give them a heavy flamer with a range of 2 that they can now shoot through and do some pretty decent damage. And in exchange for these combi shooters, they now get a free shooter attack every 2 turns. Same with these rocket launchers here. They can fire them every 2 turns. Not great. Again, with these reloads, I just don't like these reload abilities compared to the other units. It's like, it doesn't feel like these rockets are so amazing that they need to have 2 reload times. So I've seen 1 or 2 players use this, but I think they end up regretting it. So it's like Combi Scorches or just the custom shooters, and just calling it a day there is more than sufficient. So the big thing you got to watch out for these guys, though, is they're really easy to snipe down with Hellblasters, especially if they have the heavy immolators. Effectively, one of those attacks will take out 1 model, so all of a sudden if you try to use these guys to soak up Overwatch, I know it'll be a good idea because of their 7 armor. It's a terrible idea if there's heavy blasters out there, because you effectively nullify your 155 points here, and then you're stuck with 1 unit that can barely survive another attack, because if there's only 1 there, then they get jumped. They get jumped by other melee units and they just get slaughtered. The Burner Boys. They seem like they should be really good. I have yet to have a good match with them or be slaughtered by opponents who utilize them. What I tend to find is they just can't quite get into combat, and then everybody freaks out because they've got flamers, which can do a lot of damage, and so they just get sniped down because they're fairly easy to kill. But they do have burners. I don't know if they only have 1 ranger that can shoot through for a 2. You have to use up their stuff, otherwise they end up suffering momentum penalties for the amount of unsped actions that they have. If you end up using the attacks, though, they get the momentum bonus here, and then they have the mob rule, which also gives them additional bonuses. I kind of wish the knobs would, you know, give a bonus too. Maybe at that point in time it would be worth having the 110 points, but they just don't feel worth it. The next unit is the Ludus. I have very mixed feelings about these guys. They do very good with shooty def guns. Even though it has 3 armor piercing, if you use Might is Right, they effectively end up getting 50% shots and armor piercing. So now these things can do damage against vehicles and infantry, which is highly effective. They have a chance to do some mild splash damage. And I got really excited when I first saw these guys, because I thought, oh my god, these beamy def guns, these are going to be amazing. They're going to be just like the shock cannons for the the Tyranids. It's going to be great. I've been really thoroughly disappointed with them. Saying that, I haven't tried it with the Might is Right attack. Maybe that's the secret to unlock their potential, but they've only got 1 attack. They only do 24 to 32 damage, armor piercing of 6, So you think, oh, these are going to be like sniper units, they're going to be great, they've got 5 armor piercing. I just find that they don't land their attacks as much as you would expect. And then the Truck Smasher ability, which gives them 1 armor piercing, 20% critical hit chance, plus 25 damage against vehicles. I find that they tend to do the same amount of damage to vehicles, whether they have the shooty def gun versus the beamy def gun, and it's 15 points cheaper to just do this. And then these guys are much better at taking infantry out as well, so I just don't bring the beamy def guns anymore. One of the more interesting units in the Orks is the Flash Gits. These are pretty much your well-rounded damage dealers to everything. They pretty reliably do 80 to 100 damage to vehicles. They can do damage to the high tier Tyranid infantry about the same rate. They're not good against kind of the low tier infantry because they tend to waste all their shots and go for model kills, so they'll only take out like 3 out of 5 models, and so they have a big overkill potential. But they have 8 attacks, they've got armor piercing of 4, base accuracy. The big thing with them is if they don't move, you can use their flashy Crumpin ability, which then gives you an additional attack for every movement that you don't use. So it gives you a bunch of extra shots to try to kill vehicles and other high tier units. War Bikers. These guys are crazy. They've got an armor of 6. They can move around like nobody's business with a movement of 5. They've gotten a buff now to their Daka gun, so they can actually do some damage with shooting now. They do explode on death, but they have these 2 abilities here that just make things get a little bit crazy. You can use the Cloud of Smoke, which now gives you plus 15% accuracy for 2 turns, which brings your evasion up to 15 or 30. And then you can use the big red button, and that increases their movement to 2, so now you're up to 7. They now have 2 additional accuracy, or 10% additional accuracy, which brings them up to like a 40% accuracy. Their range damage decreases, but you're not going to be really doing that anyways if you're using the big red button. And because they have an armor of 6, they can just sit there, capture strategic points, ride from strategic point to strategic point. You won't be able to shoot them with range because they're sitting there soaking up so much fire. And I was playing a match where I literally just sat one on there and there was 3 different units attacking it. There was a Stormboys, Gretchen, and what was the third one? Burner Boys, and they were just attacking him with attack after attack after attack, and I think it was for like 3 turns in a row, and they still couldn't kill this guy. So I think they're way too good for their current points. They either gotta make the Cloud of Smoke only last for 1 turn, maybe, and then keep the cooldowns here, or if they keep it this way, they gotta lower the armor down to like 4 or something. So there's no reason a guy on a motorcycle should have just as much armor as, you know, 1 less armor than a Mega Knob, which literally has his whole body in armor, or, you know, has the equivalent armor of a, you know, war boss. I mean, it just doesn't seem like it's appropriate, and they just can be so challenging to kill with all this evasion. I mean, the whole point of evasion is to help keep guys alive, and then you give them 6 armor as well. I mean, they're only 90 points, so they shouldn't be. I feel like they're hitting way above where they should. The next unit is the Def Dread. These guys are pretty fun. They can also be very frustrating, and you have to handle them with a little bit of care. So you have a couple of different loadouts here. Their big shooters just got nerfed a little bit, or you can equip them with a Scorcha. The Scorches will allow you to potentially keep your Sisters of Repentia and other melee units away from them unless they get a vehicle up right in your grill and you waste the Scorcha attack on them. But this has a range 2 heavy flamer, so it's able to wipe out most infantry. They also have the Dread Claw, which is a great base damage with some splash, so these guys do a shit ton of melee damage. And their big shooters are not bad, you know, 32 attacks at 3 to 5 with armor piercing of 3. They could do good damage, you know, you get a bunch of them together, and even against vehicles they can still do damage. And the big thing that you have to handle them with care about is this Dread Mob ability. So it stacks when there's within 2 tiles of other Def Dreads. It stacks up to 2 because the maximum you can bring is 3. But for each Dreadnought every Def Dread you have near, it gives you plus 20% shots to your range, or it gives you plus 10% melee damage, and it gives you more movement. The problem is, as soon as it moves more than 2 tiles away, it loses the bonus, just like, you know, any of these other bonuses here. The dock is in, or the force field here. You don't keep it for the whole turn. So what can happen is if you're sitting like, oh, you have 3 of them next to each other, you see that you got this extra bonus movement, you start moving your Def Dreads. If at any time when all 3 of those are moving, it will lose the extra movement point, and then it'll end up using your action instead. And so you can accidentally end up putting yourself in a situation where you're charging these guys in, thinking you're going to set yourself up for an excellent play, and you then click on the unit after you're moving all 3 of them around, and if they lost the bonus anytime during that movement, you've now wasted your action point and screwed up your whole plan here. So you got to be very, very careful. You can only move them 1 or 2 squares, well, probably 2 squares at a time, to try to keep cohesion and make sure you don't end up losing your points. So very frustrating, but a very good ability. The big thing is if they end up getting flanked, they will get one-shotted by Sisters of Repentia. Sisters of Repentia, if you get a flank attack, they use that charge, it's an automatic dead Def Dread, so just be very, very careful with that. And the last Ork unit here is the Defcopter. Very fun unit. Defaults with the rockets. I can't say I've ever seen anybody use the rockets because of the reload time. It's just very frustrating, so most people will end up using the custom Mega Bolter, or custom Mega Blaster. It's the same Mega Blaster that the Big Mech has. He's got good accuracy, good damage, good armor piercing, just good all-around unit. Does explode on death. And then the big fun thing about this is if there's a bunch of low-tier infantry that are all together, if you're fighting like a Tyrannid Swarm player and they've got all their Tormagons together, end up flying this bad boy over there. It'll drop 30 to 40 damage AP 4 on one unit, which will effectively kill any low tier unit, and it does splash damage of 15 to 20 with an AP of 2 of everyone around there. It does deal friendly fire as it suggests, but because the splash damage is only AP of 2, I played a match where I brought like 3 or 4 of these and I just dropped grenades over and over and over again on assault marines and death companies. I think after 4 of these attacks I ended up killing 2 squads and then damaging the other surrounding assault marines down to like a third of health. And you know, for over 400 points there, that was not a good trade. So I kind of wish the either the damage would come up or the armor piercing would go up, because I mean, it runs them in there, it effectively makes them a kamikaze. It just feels like there's got to be a little bit more, because that's weaker than the grenades that are utilized, and I feel like it should at least be near the equivalent of a grenade. So but maybe that's too overpowered, because you don't want to clear out like 7 units with this thing if they're all globbed together. But at the same time, if you're going to be wasting 130 points plus, well, 150 points with the custom Mega Bolter, you'd kind of hope to get a little more damage than that. So it's definitely a fun faction. Most people will be playing a lot with the Stormboys. If you're going to do with a Stormboy heavy faction, then you probably want to get a War Boss to boost up their abilities. The Weird Boy, because he's got so much range here, definitely want to use that. Can keep him behind cover to do damage. Can buff up your guys with the extra damage. This guy will keep them keep your vehicles alive, and then the custom force field that helps lower the damage dealt. Pain Boy, much better unit now, gives the bonus HP. Gonna play around with him to see how I like to use him, but I think it's gonna be a lot more viable now. We kind of talked about the Stormboys. They can do so-so damage, but because of their health, they can end up soaking up more shots. And then not only do they have the jump charge attack, you gotta be careful because this charge, unlike the other Assault Marines that doesn't charge pistol overwatches, these guys do. And if you use the Stormboy strike, they end up acting as grenades themselves. So Gretchen, good at opening up Overwatch, good at holding points. Boys, cheap unit, good damage dealing, especially with the big Shudas, probably the most cost-effective unit on the Orks with utilizing their get stuck in and then momentum gains plus their stick bombs. Great unit. Knobs, big old letdown if you're going to use them. Get yourself some upgraded units, but for 130 points is probably not worth it. But maybe getting a whole army of knobs with a war boss or something. Maybe I'll play around with some different selections here, but I can't say I've ever played against an opponent that does that. I have played against several opponents that will select Mega Armor knobs. They're definitely fun, but they're easily able to get ganked by Assault Marines and other jump infantry that can go behind them and weaken them up. And for 7 armor, it seems like they just get damaged by a lot more units, even with low armor piercing, than what you'd expect. Either go with the heavy flamers or just keep them in there. Kill saw melee. Remember to use the hit a martyr ability for major damage buffs with only slight debuffs to suffering 5% extra damage. Burna's probably good. I just haven't found a good use for them yet. They're the low tier flamers, but for 90 points I think there's other units I'd rather use. The Ludus, the shooty def guns seem to be a better I mean, there's situations with the beamy def guns if you're fighting like a bunch of Terminators or Inceptors, something like that, that maybe you'd wish you'd have the beamy def guns because the shooty def gun won't do as much. But most people are using low to medium tier infantry, in which case the shooty def gun's going to be just as effective, if not more so, than the beamy def gun. So I just recommend the standard kit. Flash kits, great damage. Damage is everything. Good at anti-vehicle. Just got to keep them alive, but at 95 HP per unit, they can definitely tank some hits. And if you can keep them alive and not move them, they can do amazing amounts of damage for you. Warbiker, run around, capture strategic points, soak up Overwatch, try to get their evasion as high as possible when you're doing it, and just drive your enemy crazy. Dreads, major powerhouses. Make sure they don't get flanked, or for whatever reason they seem to be very easy to destroy compared to like Varian Dreadnoughts and everybody else. I'm not sure why they seem like they're so easy to kill, but they definitely do feel that way. Good range damage, good heavy flamers here, excellent melee. Just be very, very cautious with the ability like we talked about to make sure you're not out of sync and end up accidentally using up your action point. And then the Defcopter is very fun hit and run units, fun to capture points, good damage against AP, and a bunch of low tier infantry get stuck together, make them pay with dropping some big bombs on them. So hopefully that gives you an idea of when and why you'd want to select different forces on the Orks here, and gives you, hopefully it will be a little more successful. I recommend watching some of my multiplayer matches. It'll give you ideas of different build outs here, some with elite infantry, some with range infantry, some with melee, the Tyranids with the elite versus the swarm tactics, different kind of Space Marine loadouts, and then you get your kind of your standard Necron loadouts. So thanks for watching. I hope this is helpful for you. Have a great day, and if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe. Encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.